Without changing aircraft, I can go right through now, and this suits me fine.
First-class passengers contribute only 6% to Air New Zealand's revenue. Cargo, 11%, mail, 2.5%, charter, 5%, contracts, 3.5%, and other services, 5%. The big money comes from ordinary passengers. Air New Zealand carries a higher percentage of its own nationals than any other comparable airline, and they carry them from other countries too.
One ordinary Kiwi family
I just love New Zealand.
is about to take flight on the adventure of a lifetime.
A 6-month working holiday in Italy.
Can they cope with the cooking?
Still got the head on it.
Oh, to have a Tim Tam.
Deal with the driving?
What could go wrong?
And will they fall in love
I didn't realise what it was like to relax till I come here.
with Italy?
The Italian way is beginning to look pretty good.
Making Italy home. 5 o'clock Monday on Heartland.
For the Air New Zealand crew, it's the end of the line. But the plane with some of its passengers will fly on direct to London, hired by the British from Air New Zealand.
The deal has not contributed greatly in the increase in passengers which we are carrying, but it is important on 2 or 3 major counts. Firstly, it does give the New Zealander and the English people a one-plane service from London to Auckland and vice versa, even though the Los Angeles-London service is strictly a British Airways service.
As soon as it lands, British Airways take over servicing the plane. Inside the flight deck, a British engineer checks out the controls before formally accepting the aircraft. It's rather like checking the mileage on a hire car before you take it over. Except that in this case, the vehicle is worth something like $25 million. In the cabin itself, the army of cleaning and servicing staff move in to prepare the aircraft for the next leg of its journey. It's normal procedure for any turnaround point, but there are differences. British Airways, for example, prefer their own selection of in-flight movies.
Hey, what do we got on here, George? Kaleidoscope. Oh. Yeah, the movies, man. I didn't check the lens.
And although they leave most of the Air New Zealand furnishings intact, the British prefer yellow blankets to Air New Zealand's green. And the stock of New Zealand magazines from Thursday and Eve to the Pacific Islands Monthly is taken well away. Except for the occasional beard, the British flight crew don't look much different to the New Zealanders. British Airways is the only airline which allows its staff to grow them. No one can do much to change the outward look of the plane, but as soon as the UK hostesses and stewards come aboard, they do their best to add a British touch inside. Me News mainly, and London guides. Not forgetting, of course, those inimitable English magazines. At Heathrow Airport, London, the DC-10 will arrive as just another scheduled British Airways flight. It comes in at the same time every day, the fastest, most frequent connection between New Zealand and the UK. The changeover contract with the British lasts until 1979. The rental has enabled Air New Zealand to buy 2 more DC-10s than it could otherwise afford. And there are other advantages.
From Air New Zealand's point of view, and certainly from a public relations advertising point of view, our DC-10 in our own colours going on to London Airport every day is a wonderful thing. You can't buy a billboard like that in London. From the economic side, the benefit to Air New Zealand lies mostly in the fact that we have purchased 2 aircraft at 1973 prices for a need for our own services in 1979. The problem with the airlines over recent years has been that there's been too many aeroplane seats chasing too few passengers. And the trick is to fill up those empty seats, in fact, to get the greatest possible utilization from the equipment. I believe that the deal we have done with British Airways will be followed by other airlines, and I can only think that this will be for the good of the industry generally.
Although it suits Britain and New Zealand, the deal hasn't pleased the Americans, who feel it's taken passengers away from its own international carriers, many of whom are already trying desperately to woo more business their way. Los Angeles Airport's Bob Davidson.
The reasons people fly on one airline versus another are very, very minute. And I think that the last 15 years of jet travel have demonstrated that just small things like a pub on a Continental Airlines flight or certain kinds of movies tend to encourage your choice over that airline versus another. This, of course, is a result of the fact that almost all airfares on any scheduled carrier are exactly the same. So people tend to fly one airline either out of loyalty or out of perhaps image that that airline projects.
Try as they might to project an image, Air New Zealand's best efforts are inevitably swallowed up by the host of other airlines clamouring for attention. But if you look hard as you drive around Los Angeles, you'll find the occasional billboard. The message is more successful on some than on others. The sales office itself is in the commercial heart of Los Angeles, right alongside the other airlines. All of the staff and a lot of the customers are, of course, American.
How long do you think you're going to stay? Approximately.
3 weeks.
I've got just the fare for you. We have an advance purchase fare. You can buy your ticket 60 days ahead of time and stay a minimum of 3 weeks. It's $805 round trip. You have a maximum of 45 days on that fare, and you're not allowed to make any changes. And depending on the night of the week you leave, you'll have intermediate stopovers in either Tahiti or Honolulu, and sometimes Fiji.
Fiji, the most important of Teal's Pacific stopovers in the early days, and still a prime destination for Air New Zealand. Competition is a lot fiercer these days, but Air New Zealand more than holds its own. The airline employs 29 staff in Fiji, British, Fijian, Indian and Chinese.
Mr. A, SWAN, Mr. Swan, initial A, contact me.
Like a lot of Air New Zealand routes, the traffic to and from Fiji has fallen off this year. There are many contributing factors, but the duty now payable in New Zealand on imported stereos and hi-fi gear hasn't been good for business, for either the dealers or for Air New Zealand.
Well, I would like to give this thing to the next board meeting for final approval, and I just want to clear up 1 or 2 points.
Back home, however, the airline's top management still plans confidently for expansion. Among current projects, an extension of the hangars at their jet base at Mangere Airport.
Which is the alternative. And the best thing about that is not just the cost, but also it's delaying the time when we have to build another hangar, so that we know at that stage more precisely what the future holds than it does at the moment.
Right from the start, Air New Zealand's backup services have had to be as good, if not better, than other airlines. Virtually any work on any component of the DC-10 can be carried out at home. Each of the company's 6 big jets comes in for a 12-hour checkup once a week. Some of the skills and plant available here are not duplicated anywhere in the country. And although the major effort goes into the support of Air New Zealand jets, they also do work on contract for the Air Force and for industry. Any aircraft maintained with such efficiency can keep flying, in principle, forever. The only reason they are replaced is because they cease to be competitive. Right now, though, nothing challenges the DC-10. In terms of passenger comfort, capacity and economy of operation, it puts Air New Zealand at least on level pegging with the 4 big other airlines flying to and from New Zealand. And the competition has never been keener. Normally, an airline is granted access to another country only if it grants reciprocal rights in return. Thus, the only airlines represented here are those from countries Air New Zealand needs in order to operate its own services. Nowhere is the principle of nothing for nothing observed more closely than in the aviation business. And yet, when they're not at each other's throats, the airlines can present a very unified front to the outside world, brimming over with cooperation and solidarity. Last month in Oslo, Air New Zealand's chiefs joined the heads of other scheduled airlines at one of the regular meetings of IATA, the International Air Transport Association. They call this meeting the Parliament of the Industry. Only the chairman, the chief executive and top advisors are invited. For Air New Zealand, it was one of the first occasions when they were represented by their new chairman, Mr. John Jeffries, who took over the job amid howls of protest last July. And yet the protest served mainly to illustrate the point that, in the end, the airline doesn't belong to the staff of Air New Zealand or to its top executives, but to the government, representing the people of New Zealand. Still, the spectacle of our people sitting in with the big boys of world aviation to fix higher prices for fares that ordinary New Zealanders must pay can create a different impression, a point that's appreciated by Cyril Keppel.
It's a fact that our fares are much the same as anybody else's. And it's also a fact that in these days of rapidly escalating costs, that fares are going to get even more expensive. But I think you've got to look back over the years. Certainly over the last 20 years, the airlines have brought overseas travel particularly well within the orbit of the average working person in a great number of countries.
Although Air New Zealand is still reaping the benefits of that travel explosion, Mr. Keppel sees big problems ahead.
The cost of our equipment, and with this, the cost of our borrowings to purchase new equipment, is getting to be astronomical. The cost of money itself is very, very high. My greatest worry is to be able to see the way ahead where the revenue from fares can match these ever-increasing costs which we're running into.